Welcome back to the Grief Mentor podcast. If you are new here, today's episode is going to be very good for you because we're going to delve into the complexities of family grief after the loss of a child. We're going to focus on grieving styles, how to prioritize self-care amid your family's needs, and how to create a unified family grieving plan that honors individual relationships as well as honoring your child who is no longer walking beside you. Because the truth is, friend, grieving as a family is challenging. Everyone grieves in their own pace and in their own pathway. So how do you care for yourself while supporting the ones you love? Join us today as we explore ways to be able to harmonize your individual grief while providing that environment to grieve in a healthy way as a family. If you're grieving the death of your child and you want the steps that lead to believing with confidence that life is still worth living, then you're in the right place. Hello, I'm Teresa, a grief mentor. That's been where you are, and I teach grieving moms like you how to navigate life after child loss. If you're ready to take a step of courage and build a solid foundation to live with hope and purpose, then I'm here to teach you how. Are you ready for what God has for you? Then I'm ready to teach you. Are you struggling to find that balance in your family's grieving journey? This is an area that is often overlooked and underestimated. But as the shock of what has happened to you as a family starts to lead into the reality of what you're facing, it can get real sticky, friend. Emotions run high, things are said we cannot forget, and it turns into this huge snowball that just keeps getting bigger and bigger for many reasons that we're going to get into today. First of which, you must understand what a boundary is and how to use them. This is the first place we start in the grief roadmap. If you were sitting across from one of my students, you likely might hear, I didn't have a clue how important boundaries are in grief. We spend the first 3 weeks on what a boundary is, how to use them in your grief journey so that you can still be a family on the other side of this. By that, I mean when you reach a place where emotion isn't the driving factor in your life every day. Family grief is hard, friend. There is no question about it. And by the way, the next session of the Grief Roadmap starts in August. So if you are thinking that you may be interested, get your name on that wait list. The program opens first to the wait list, and it's free, and there's no obligation to join if you decide not to. Visit my website at thegriefmentor.com or my show notes to find the link. But if you need help now, if things are spiraling out of control and you really need a plan to put in place, consider scheduling a Grief Mentor session with me. And then we can sit down with your individual situation, and I can help you personalize an approach to support both your healing and that of your family. When my son died, I didn't have a clue what I needed. All I wanted was my son back. Yeah, I know you know. But the reality is, the people that we love are also experiencing loss, and they are grieving in their own unique way. So how do we do this? How do we take care of ourselves while lovingly support those we love? That's what I'm going to teach you today. Now, you have to understand that we spend 3 weeks on this in the Grief Roadmap, so I'm just going to touch the high points here, but I would get pen and paper so that you can write these things down, because what I'm about to tell you right now should be enough of an eye-opener to help you understand at least where you need to start. The 2 most common mistakes we make when grieving as a family are, number 1, expecting others to grieve the way we think they should grieve. You see, that's the first trap. We interpret our grief based on the relationship we have with our child. Therefore, we project that on other people in our life, usually our partners or the people that we're doing life with, and we expect them to grieve the same way we do. That's the first trap, okay? Trap number 2, expecting others to know exactly how you feel and what your needs are without you expressing it, right? They know me. They know what I need. They've been living with me for X amount of years. They should know what I need without me having to verbalize it. Trap number 2. Now, let me explain why these two are the most common mistakes. First of all, we have to reach a place where we can understand that there are different grieving styles. This is not a grieving style that somebody makes up because they choose to feel a certain way or not. No, there are documented grieving styles. Now, I'm not going to take a deep dive into this because I've done several podcasts on this already. This is just basically to help bring self-awareness to you, especially if you're making one or both of those mistakes that I just explained to you. There are 3 different grieving styles. One is intuitive grievers. Those are people that experience their emotions openly, often seeking verbal expression and really want to emotionally share their grief. Then there's the instrumental grievers, people who process their grief through action. They're problem solvers. They focus on the task at hand, and they can appear stoic to onlookers. And then there's a third type of grieving style that's called dissonant, which means basically they are very disconnected from what they are feeling inside and what you see on the outside. And that is very culturally dominated in regards to someone who's a dissonant griever. Usually, sometimes it's men who grew up in a culture where you don't show emotion. So those are the 3 basic grieving styles. There are more grieving styles than that, but those are the 3 basic grieving styles. So how does this impact you as a family? Misunderstandings can escalate when family members misinterpret each other's grieving methods. Then that leads us to feeling hurt, betrayed, maybe feeling isolated or frustrated. So understanding grieving styles is a big piece to that first trap. Remember, expecting others to grieve like you do. Now let's talk about the second piece to these common mistakes, and that's understanding the overwhelm. In that first season of grief, in that first 1 to 2 years, there are 3 things that are present, and I'm not going to go into a deep dive into these because we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but the 3 things that are present that produce significant overwhelm is the emotional exhaustion, right? Grief drains us emotionally, and it leaves very little energy for yourself, much less if you're grieving as a family where you are having demands put on you to care for other family members. Then you add in the physical manifestations of grief. The last podcast that I did went into detail on those physical manifestations. It's a very, very good podcast. I've had much feedback about that. So go back and catch that one. It just came out on Saturday. Then the third piece to that understanding the overwhelm is the cognitive overload. So the constant processing of our loss impairs our ability to concentrate and make decisions. And right, what do you do when you're raising a family? You're making decisions every day, all day. So we've got this situation that is setting us up for failure. So what do you do about it, right? You've got to get in front of it. You've got to get to the place where you can understand what I'm teaching you today, focusing on those 2 most common mistakes that we make. Just understanding that, I'm going to repeat those because I really do want you to write those down. The 2 most common mistakes we make when we grieve as a family is expecting others to grieve the way we do. And when we don't see that, we interpret that as if they're not doing it right or something is wrong with them. Or maybe you might think there's something wrong with you. That's the first trap we make grieving as a family. The second trap we set for ourselves is expecting others to know what we need and how we feel without us expressing it to them. Now, this is where the boundary piece comes in significantly. How you express yourself makes a huge difference on whether or not that's going to be received in a productive way. And that's something that we spend a lot of time on in the grief roadmap. Learning, first of all, being able to know what your needs are, and then being able to express them in a way that is received so that it can be managed together instead of isolating someone in your family. Now, the third piece to this is understanding how to make yourself a priority without ignoring the needs of your other family members. First of all, you have to have that self-awareness piece like we just talked about, acknowledging your own grief and being able to understand your own needs to be able to communicate those to people in your family. You've got to be able to share how you feel that they can meet your needs with other family members while encouraging them to express their needs. You got to be able to know how to recognize your limits and be able to communicate them gently to the people in your life. With that said, there also has to be space that you grant for the other people in your life to do the same as well. Now, one piece to be able to create an environment for your family to be able to grieve well together is to engage in some family activities that promote mutual support. Now, we're going to go through a few of these together here, and I'm going to give you some ideas to be able to help your family refocus. Because what happens when we grieve as a family, especially in that first couple years, is that most all of our attention, especially as mom and dad, is focusing on the loss of our child that's no longer beside us. It creates an environment to where the other family members can feel a whole range of emotions, which we're not going to go down that pathway today, but it's important to point that out, that it can create a lot of really strong emotions in the family when mom and dad are focused primarily on the grief of the child that are no longer with them. Now, hear me now. There is no condemnation in that statement. It is a fact, but it will help you be more self-aware that some of the emotions that you may see coming out in your family, as in older children, are going to express their grief differently than a younger child. It is very common for older children, especially teens, to have their first emotion come out as anger. Anger is a secondary emotion, and that means that underneath that anger is a feeling or an emotion that they have not been able to process. So grieving as a family is a difficult dynamic that needs attention, so that you will be able to work through this together so that you will remain a family as you're going through this. Now, I'm going to give you some steps right here on how to make that happen. The first step is to get a gauge on where everyone in your family is. Now, take this with a grain of salt because I'm going to suggest that you have a family meeting. However, this may not be appropriate in your situation. So you need to adapt this. This is one of the things that we can do in a grief mentor session where I can make it more personal for you. But in a family meeting, ideally, you would be able to meet as a family and just have every member of the family briefly share where they are in their grief. It kind of opens the door so that everyone will have a voice, right? So that all of the attention is not always on mom or always on dad or another family member. It opens the door for everyone to have a voice. And regardless if you're a small child or a middle school kid or a high schooler, everybody needs a voice for their grief. Now, don't be offended if your older children don't voice their grief. There's a couple of dynamics going on there. I am not a family therapist or counselor, so I'm not suggesting that I am. I'm just sharing with you what I have learned in grieving, working with grieving moms. Older siblings tend to be very protective, especially of their moms, because they have seen what their parents have gone through and they don't want to add any additional grief. So a lot of times they just lock it down. So don't interpret that as that they're shutting you out. It may be what they're doing to protect you. Now, it may go the opposite direction. Okay, there may be a lot of anger that's brewing underneath the surface, and if you have a family meeting, that could erupt. So that's what I mean by you're going to have to personalize this suggestion for a family meeting. Maybe that's something more of maybe a one-on-one as far as you sitting down with one of your children. However, if it's a relationship that's experienced some tension after your child has left this earth, then sitting down with them one-on-one may not be the best option because it may erupt into a volcano. So that's what I mean by you need some personalization, how to manage that. So family meetings can be a very good thing, but it can also create a situation to where it escalates. So use your judgment in that. Now, everybody wants to be recognized for their grief. And siblings are considered the forgotten mourners because so much focus is on mom and dad that siblings kind of get that back seat. You guys know that I'm very involved in the While We're Waiting ministry, and Jill Sullivan has a podcast, While We're Waiting, and she shared a talk that her daughter did, Bethany, on sibling grief. It is excellent. I highly encourage you to go listen to that because when her sister got sick, she was very young. I can't remember. I want to say maybe 11 or 12, 13, somewhere in that range. And her sister were best friends. So that's an excellent view for you if you've got a teenager in your home, especially a girl, that is having some challenges. Because Bethany is extremely honest in that interview. It's excellent. So I encourage you. In fact, I'll link it in the show notes for you. Because if that is a path that you're walking, just listening to Bethany's perspective may be an eye-opener to you that you've not been able to consider up to this point in your grief. Recognize that each family member's relationship with your child that went to heaven is unique, and that is going to lead to very different grief experiences. One of the ways that you can come together and create a plan as a family, holding space for that unique grief, is to allow each person in your family to mourn and to honor the child that is in heaven the way they want to. Children tends to be very much reflected in art, being able to draw and color, and maybe even it's tracing their hand. When Andrew went to heaven, his children were 3 and 21 months. And we kind of have, evolved over time, helping them express their grief. So you kind of just do what is age appropriate. Younger children, they can't express themselves really any other way because they don't have the words, right? They can't sit down with mom and dad in a family meeting and say, oh, this is the way I'm feeling. However, you give them a pen or a marker or a crayon and have them draw, you might be surprised what they come up with. So allow everyone to have their voice. Now, you probably need to set some boundaries. If you're going to do some sort of family meeting especially, you need to put some boundaries out there ahead of time of what the expectations are, if everyone is old enough to be able to understand that, right? So that's how important boundaries are, because we don't want this family meeting to make things worse. This next piece I want to share with you, I really want you to listen, especially if you are mom and dad who have young children at home. One of the things that goes away is family fun. Okay, when your child leaves this earth, mom and dad are not in a position most of the time to think about scheduling family fun. And maybe that was a part of your family. Maybe you had one night a week where you as a family came together and had some family fun. So what I would like to encourage you to do, if you've not been able to do that since your child went to heaven, think about scheduling some family fun again. Something happens when you can laugh together as a family. Walls come down, and it strengthens those family bonds. It provides that kind of mutual emotional support. And it can be a healthy distraction, which gives us those moments of respite from the grief. And that's what they need. Even children who are not able to express it need respite from that and grief, because here's the benefits. It improves mood. Participating in fun activities can alleviate those feelings of depression and anxiety. And like I said, it kind of opens the door and let the guard down that, maybe mom and dad are not so bad after all, right? Especially if you're dealing with one of those teenagers that are harboring all that anger. Shared experiences create opportunities for that open dialogue. It creates that kind of supportive environment. So what can you do? as grieving moms and dads, we don't have a lot of energy, right? So what does that look like? It could be going for a walk together. It could be going for a bike ride together. You could do those creative projects, like I said, and you could work on something together as a family that might bring you together by creating a way to honor your loved one together. Maybe that's making a scrapbook. Okay, that's a positive thing. Then they can have some control. So let's talk about this piece quickly. This is not in my notes, but I feel the need to bring this out. Children can control very little in their lives. And we see that come about, right? The toddlers who throw tantrums about what they want to control. Well, it kind of diminishes as they get older. Hopefully your teenager's not throwing tantrums. But it's still the same principle. There's very little in their life they can control. So what you'll see many times is a child focusing on what they can control and making that a thorn in mom and dad's flesh, because they don't have a voice for their grief. And so the way they're making their voice known to you is creating a situation to where you have to pay attention to what they are trying to control. Does that make sense? One way that you can help alleviate that is helping them have a voice for their grief. That could be some sort of creative project where everybody contributes to honor your loved one in a special way. It could be a scrapbook. It could be a table in your home where everybody can contribute and put something on that table in memory of your loved one. And then, of course, there's just the simple game night. Pull out the games that if you regularly play games when your child was still walking beside you, bring those games out again. Yes, it might be difficult for you, but it could also be a way that you can show your children, look, we're going to add some normalcy back in our life, because just like us, they need routine and structure and normalcy to be added back to their life. They want mom and dad to still be their mom and dad. So consider that. Incorporating that family fun time into your grieving process allows moments of joy, that spontaneous laughter that maybe you haven't experienced in a while, connection, serving as a reminder that it's okay to laugh along with the tears. These shared activities can be a vital component of healing for your family, helping family members support one another while you honor their individual grieving styles. Now, it's important to point out that if things have escalated in your family to a point to where communication has completely stopped, or maybe you are concerned about your child's safety, it's time to seek out a family grief therapist. And I'll include a link in my show notes. You can go to psychologytoday.com. That is a great website because you can put in your zip code. It'll pull up the people that are closest to you, and you can put in several filters. If you want Christian, and if you're a Christian, I would never sit and let somebody speak into my life that does not hold my same values. So that would be a filter for me. You can include family therapy. You can include anything that you want in that. So if things have escalated to the point to where they feel completely out of control to you, it is time to take that step, friend. Don't wait. Take that step. The truth is that grieving as a family requires a lot of patience, a lot of empathy, and intentional efforts to respect everyone's individual grief. That starts with those two common mistakes that I started this podcast out with today. Being able to understand that everyone is not going to grieve exactly the way you do, and don't expect people to read your mind. Have grace for each other. Don't expect someone to know and understand what your needs are without you expressing them, because they are grieving too. And friend, it is okay to prioritize self-care while you are going through this grief journey. What that looks like to you personally, I do not know, but that could mean taking 15 minutes for yourself alone after you come home from work, or 30 minutes to yourself alone to be able to process your grief before you can meet the needs of someone else. There's a scripture that was an anchor for me in my grief journey, and I'd like to share it with you today. You can find it in 1 Peter 4:8. Above all else, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Friend, grieving as a family is definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. As God is your guide, when you are able to allow yourself to see another's perspective, it goes a long way in being able to love each other deeply. It's also good to spend some time in prayer, repeating the verse in Psalms that says, in Psalms 139:24, it says, "See if there are any offensive ways in me, O Lord, and lead me in the way of everlasting." I like how the New Living Translation says it. "Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life." When we humble ourselves before our Father in heaven, He will open our eyes to the things that we need to change. And I pray that for you today, friend. Grieving as a family is hard, but it's not impossible. He will show you the way. And that's all I have for you today. So until next time, take care